Lavrov says that both Russia and Britain oppose any foreign intervention in Syria. Russia is primarily interested in stopping violence immediately. The UN Security Council condemns Al-Houla massacre and calls for a full investigation to expose the criminals. And Syria's representative says hundreds of armed terrorists attacked the security forces and killed dozens of civilians in Tel Dow and Ash-Shumariya. Good afternoon, this is News in English from the Syrian Arab television in Damascus. The UN envoy to Syria, Kofi Annan, stressed that the solution in Syria should be a peaceful one through a political process which includes everybody. In his statement at his arrival to Damascus, he said that Al-Houla massacre is condemned by all sides and the Syrian government is fulfilling its role in investigating this crime. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov affirmed that Russia supports Annan plan to solve the crisis in Syria, adding that the solution must be based on respecting Syria's independence and sovereignty without any foreign intervention. In a joint press conference with his British counterpart William Hague, Mr. Lavrov said that some powers were calling upon the opposition to foil the Annan plan. This created suspicion of the intentions of some states around Syria. He also asserted that Russia's role remained essential and important because it made the Syrian government accept the Annan plan. Mr. Lavrov condemned Al-Houla massacre and called upon all parties in Syria to stop violence. The British Foreign Minister William Hague admitted that armed terrorist groups were behind the escalation of violence in Syria. He stressed the necessity of ending violence from all parties in Syria. Condemnation of the massacre of Al-Houla continued. The spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry called for an immediate investigation of this terrible crime. He also called for the full implementation of the Annan plan to solve the crisis in Syria. Iran also condemned this crime and asserted that such acts were aimed at creating chaos and instability in the country in order to block the way towards any peaceful solution. Iran also called for punishing the criminals. It expressed confidence that such terrorist crimes are bound to fail. Iran also asserted that the attempts to foil the Annan plan would inevitably fail. Last night, the UN Security Council strongly condemned the massacre that claimed the lives of dozens of innocent people in Al-Houla in Homs. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for a full investigation of this crime by the mission of the UN observers in order to expose the terrorists who carried out this vicious massacre. The Council asserted that all members affirmed their full commitment to Syria's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity. They also asserted their full support for the efforts of the UN Special Envoy Kofi Annan. Syria's permanent representative, Dr. Al-Jaafari, affirmed Syria's condemnation of this massacre, asserting that the timing was not a coincidence. Shortly before the visit of the UN envoy, Mr. Al-Jaafari called upon the countries which claim to be supportive of Annan plan to stop arming and embracing the terrorists.
The massacre that took place in the village Al-Houla in Syria is an appalling, horrific, unjustified and unjustifiable crime. This massacre was condemned by my government in the strongest terms possible. And here my government's version of the condemnation has joined exactly the wording adopted right a few minutes ago by the Security Council. I would like here to condemn also, on behalf of my government, the tsunami of lies that were said a few minutes ago by some members of the Council who tried to mislead you by saying that their way of leveling accusations against my government is based on what they said, evidences. They are wrong and they are misleading you. Neither General Mood nor anybody else told the Security Council in the informal session that he would blame the Syrian government's forces for what happened. It's really pitiful and regrettable that some members of the council came out just a few minutes after General Mood had finished his briefing to mislead you, to tell you lies about what happened. I invite you all to look at what happened in Al-Houla in its entirety, in the comprehensiveness of the picture. What happened in Al-Houla yesterday has a background, and we should understand this background in order to catch and understand who perpetrated this crime. Yesterday, after the Friday prayer, 200 to 300 armed men gathered around 2 o'clock p.m. They gathered in several points, actually, and then they moved and they met in one point in Al-Houla. They had pickup cars loaded with heavy weapons such as anti-tank missiles, mortars, and machine guns the Libyan way you saw a couple months ago. And they started attacking the law enforcement forces in the area, who were positioned in 5 different points. And at the same time, the military operations, these attacks, military attacks, lasted from 2 o'clock p.m. up to 11 o'clock in the evening. So here we are not talking about a military attack that took place and ended in a matter of half an hour. It's a full-fledged military operation planned in advance with multi-tasked purposes. After attacking the military forces, the law enforcement orders positions, they turned towards the civilians, and then they moved to another village which is very next to the Al-Houla, 1 kilometer away, where they burned the national hospital. They burned the crops of the farmers, and they burned houses. And they killed also dozens of innocent civilians in another village also next to Al-Houla called Shumariya. So here we are not talking only about one incident that took place in one precise area. We are talking about a theater of operation that engulfed many small villages in the area. My government has established a national commission of inquiry tasked with the mission of finding out who are the perpetrators of this horrific massacre, so that they will be brought to justice. Whoever committed these crimes will be held accountable. by the Syrian authorities, by the Syrian government's law in the country.